Please don't adopt me. Adopt my mom instead.
The park in North Haven was alive with gentle energy as families gathered for the town's annual charity event. Laughter floated on the crisp autumn breeze, mingling with the rustle of fallen leaves underfoot. Tables were lined with toys and clothes for children in need, while volunteers moved between booths with practiced cheer. Among them stood Jackson Whitmore, a billionaire whose name few recognized here. He had chosen not to be introduced, not to speak. He watched from a quiet spot near the trees, his tailored coat catching the light, his hands in his pockets. There was a stillness in his expression, a man more used to observing than being seen. Not far away, Elara Monroe, 27, gently pushed a small wheelchair along the uneven pathway. Her golden, wavy hair framed a face marked by quiet resilience, and her eyes, though tired, remained attentive to every need of the child before her. Lila, her 4-year-old daughter, wore a pink dress, her legs motionless but her spirit alert. Her hair was tied into 2 neat ponytails. From her chair, she studied the world carefully, especially the tall man standing under the trees. Elara knelt beside her. "Do you want to go see the balloons, sweetheart?" But Lila was staring at someone else. Jackson had just crouched to help a boy pick up his dropped juice box. Lila watched him, blinking. There was something in the way he moved, gentle, unhurried, real. A volunteer passing by noticed her gaze. Smiling, she leaned closer and said playfully, "Would you like that nice man to adopt you? He looks like he'd be a great dad." A few people around chuckled softly. Elara gave a tight smile and opened her mouth to redirect the moment. But Lila spoke first. She turned her head, looked at the volunteer, then at Jackson, then finally up at her mother. Her expression was serious, composed in a way that made Elara freeze. And then, clearly and calmly, she said, "Please don't adopt me. Adopt my mom instead." The laughter vanished. All sound seemed to fade, leaving a stunned stillness in its place. Several heads turned. The air tightened with surprise and confusion. Jackson straightened slowly, caught off guard. He looked down at the small girl who had just said something no one knew how to respond to. Elara's heart slammed in her chest, her cheeks flushed with heat. "Lila," she whispered, reaching for her daughter's hand, unsure whether to hush or hold her. But Lila remained still. She had not spoken from impulse. She had watched her mother cry quietly behind closed doors, watched her struggle with shopping bags, with wheelchairs, with hope. She had asked why other kids had 2 parents, and why her mom always looked away when people talked about family. She had heard Elara whisper apologies she did not understand but never forgot. So, when she saw Jackson, kind eyes, calm presence, no pity, something stirred in her. In her young mind, adoption was not about papers or custody. It meant a safe place. It meant someone choosing you, loving you, staying. And if someone deserved that more than anyone, it was her mom. She had decided. Jackson slowly walked over and crouched again, lowering himself until he was eye level with her. His eyes, usually unreadable, now held something raw. He gently placed his hand over hers where it rested on the armrest. "That's the bravest thing I've ever heard," he said, his voice low, moved. Elara stood frozen. She could barely meet his eyes. Her throat tightened. There were no words. Around them, people watched, not with judgment, but awe. No one expected such a small voice to carry so much truth. Jackson looked back at Lila and smiled, a little slower this time, a different smile, one that meant something had shifted. In his chest, something long dormant stirred awake. It was not just admiration, or pity, or curiosity. It was the beginning of a realization that sometimes the simplest words, spoken by the smallest voices, could unlock a door you never knew existed. And so, with one sentence, a child had planted the first seed of change in a man who thought he had already lived enough to never be surprised again. Before the pink dress and the small wheelchair, Before North Haven and late autumn charity events, Elara Monroe had a different life, one filled with motion, music, and dreams. At 23, she was on the cusp of becoming a professional ballerina, having earned a hard-won scholarship to one of Chicago's most prestigious arts academies. Her instructors called her a natural. Her peers admired her grace. Her future looked bright, a life aimed at center stage. She always wore her long, softly curled blonde hair in a bun during rehearsals, her eyes focused, her heart pulsing with every note. The stage was the only place she felt truly alive. Then everything changed. Just weeks before a major audition that could launch her career, she found out she was pregnant. The father, a street guitarist she'd met the summer before, disappeared as soon as she told him. No promises. No arguments. Just silence. Everyone told her she still had time to walk away, that she could have her life back. But Elara chose to stay. She gave up the audition, gave up the academy, gave up the spotlight. And when Lila was born, her world shrank to a hospital room, then shattered again when doctors explained that her daughter had a rare spinal condition. Lila would likely never walk. There was no time to mourn. Not for her career, not for her old life, not even for her child's diagnosis. There was only survival, and she committed to it fiercely. Over the next 4 years, Elara worked every job she could. Mornings at a coffee shop, weekends cleaning houses, nights selling used clothes online. She memorized bus routes, cut her own hair, skipped meals to afford medication, and learned to lift Lila's wheelchair with one hand while carrying groceries with the other. They lived in a cramped ground-floor unit in a decaying North Haven building. The rent was low, the heat unreliable, but it was safe, and Elara turned it into a home. She stayed neat, even when tired beyond words. Her golden hair was always combed, her clothes plain but clean. Lila wore her pink dress, refashioned from one of Elara's old stage costumes, stitched and restitched with fraying thread and a mother's care. Their days were small, but full. Elara taught Lila letters with sidewalk chalk. At night, she read fairy tales aloud, giving each character its own voice, delighted by Lila's laughter. Her daughter loved stories where queens didn't need rescuing, and where magic came from inside the heart. But even the strongest love bends under pressure. One winter night, after a double shift and a long walk through snow, Elara sat at the kitchen table holding a letter from a non-profit she had hoped would help with Lila's next round of physical therapy. The answer was no. Missing paperwork, insufficient eligibility, maybe next year. She didn't cry at first. She just sat there, hands trembling, eyes unfocused. Later, curled together on their thin floor mattress, Lila stirred and whispered, "Mommy, am I a burden?" Elara froze. Then her heart cracked open. She pulled Lila into her arms and held her tightly, tighter than ever before, as if her embrace could shield them from every cruel thing in the world. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she whispered, "No, baby, never. You are why I wake up, why I fight. You are not my burden. You are my reason." Lila didn't speak again. She nestled into her mother's chest, tiny fingers fisting gently into her shirt. And for a moment, despite everything, the world felt just a little lighter. That night, in the quiet of a one-room apartment with peeling paint and flickering light, there was something stronger than struggle, stronger than fear. There was love. And Elara, though exhausted and uncertain, held on to the only truth that had never wavered. She would give anything for Lila. Anything. Jackson could not get her eyes out of his mind. Elara Monroe. There had been something in the way she looked at her daughter, quiet strength wrapped in exhaustion. And Lila, the little girl in the pink dress with the too-grown voice who had asked him, a stranger, to adopt her mother. That moment had etched itself into his memory. He had attended hundreds of charity events, met countless faces, but this felt personal. A few days later, unable to shake the image from his mind, Jackson asked his assistant to quietly gather background on Ilara and Lila. Nothing invasive, just the basics. The report was brief. A single mother, ground floor apartment in one of the oldest buildings in North Haven, one of Jackson's own properties, slated for redevelopment. No debts, no legal issues, no complaints, just a woman juggling 3 part-time jobs, raising a disabled daughter alone, always paying rent on time. Jackson stared at the page for a long while. It wasn't what the report said, it was what it didn't say. It didn't speak of how often she probably cried in silence. It didn't say how tired she must be, or how lonely. It couldn't measure what it took to keep showing up for life with grace when everything inside wanted to collapse. But somehow, he felt it all. One afternoon, under the pretense of reviewing site plans, Jackson visited the building. He stayed back until he spotted Ilara climbing the crooked staircase, a laundry basket in her arms. Her foot slipped, the basket tipped. Without thinking, Jackson stepped forward and caught her elbow, steadying her with one hand as socks and towels scattered. "Careful," he said with a faint smile. "This staircase might be the next thing to fall apart." Ilara flushed as she realized who he was. Thank you. I didn't know." "That I'm the landlord?" he finished gently, releasing her arm. "Yeah, most people don't. I should have fixed these stairs months ago." She nodded, unsure what to say. He knelt, gathered the spilled laundry, handed her the basket, then he left, no fanfare. A few days later, he returned with a small box of cookies and a children's storybook. He knocked lightly. Lila opened the door with wide eyes and a delighted grin. He sat cross-legged on the floor as Lila chattered on about a magical forest, a talking squirrel, and how her mother used to be a real princess who lost her crown when Lila was born. Jackson smiled, listening. Ilara hovered in the doorway, quiet and guarded. He made no grand gestures, no promises, just kept showing up, with fruit, puzzles, a small coloring book. Never too much, never pity, only presence. One evening, while folding dish towels nearby, Ilara paused as Lila softly asked, "Mom, do you miss dancing?" Ilara stilled. "I do," she said gently, "but no one needs to see me dance anymore, sweetheart." Jackson didn't speak, but her words clung to him. The next week, something quietly changed in the neighborhood park. A wooden platform appeared beside the playground. A mirror leaned against one post. Fairy lights strung overhead. A painted sign read, "For those who still remember how to dance." Ilara noticed it while pushing Lila on the swings. A group of little girls played on the new platform, spinning, giggling, trying to mimic ballet moves. Some were from the weekend dance group she taught for free. One mother called out, "Miss Ilara, show them how it's done." She laughed awkwardly. "Oh, no, I couldn't." But then, music flowed through the park speakers. A soft classical melody, familiar, one she had danced to once, years ago. Something shifted. She stepped forward, one foot on the platform, then the other. Her shoulders rolled back, her arms lifted, her body remembered. She moved, light as breath, elegant, effortless, like she'd never stopped. Jackson watched from a distance, hands in his pockets. He didn't approach, didn't take credit. He only smiled. He hadn't given her a stage. He had given her back a piece of herself. Jackson kept showing up. Not with grand gestures, but in quiet, steady ways, like morning sun through an old curtain or the warmth of tea on a cold afternoon. He brought books for Lila, puzzles, stories, and once, a balloon animal that made her laugh so hard she nearly tipped out of her wheelchair. Ilara watched him with cautious eyes. Every smile, every small gift tightened something inside her. Kindness without expectation was unfamiliar. She worried. Not for herself, but for Lila. What if Jackson disappeared? What if this comfort faded like all the others? What if her daughter started hoping for a family that was never going to be real? So she kept a polite distance, thankful but guarded. Jackson never pressed. He seemed to understand the unspoken boundaries. He asked about Lila's therapy, not about Alara's past. He complimented her soup, not her sadness. And he listened, really listened. When she spoke, one rainy afternoon, thunder murmured low in the distance as Jackson arrived, holding a small umbrella and a book. The rain kept them on the covered porch of Alara's unit. Lila curled up under a blanket and fell asleep in her mother's lap. Alara poured ginger tea into chipped mugs, her hand slightly trembling as she passed his cup. They sat side by side in silence, watching the rain bead down the railings. Then Jackson said quietly, "I used to think losing my mom was just a sad part of my past, but lately, I wonder if that was when I stopped really living." Alara turned her head. He was not the polished businessman in that moment, not the billionaire, just a boy who had needed someone and never got them. After a beat, Alara spoke. "The night I left the stage, I sat in my dressing room for hours. I didn't cry. I stared at my shoes. They were clean, ready to perform, but I knew they'd never dance again." Jackson looked at her. "I don't regret it," she added. "Not when I see Lila's face. The day she was born, she looked at me like I was her whole world. That's when I knew I had to be the ground she stood on, even if she couldn't walk." Their eyes met. No confessions, no promises, just two people quietly unraveling old wounds in the safety of each other's presence. The next day, Jackson took Lila out on a small outing, just them. They came home with new colored pencils and fresh paper. Lila was beaming. She held something behind her back. "It's a surprise," she said, giggling when Alara asked. For days the drawing stayed hidden, until one evening, while changing the pillowcases, Alara found it. Drawn in soft crayon lines was a picture of three people: a tall man with dark hair, a woman with long yellow curls, and a little girl in a pink dress, all smiling, holding hands. Above them floated a large red heart. Alara froze. She gripped the paper, breath hitching. She walked barefoot onto the small balcony, blinking against the pale sky. And then the tears came. She pressed the drawing to her chest and whispered, voice cracking, "Alara, what are you doing? This isn't your life. You don't get to dream like this." She had learned the dangers of hope. It pulled like a current, gentle, then ruthless. She had worked too hard, stayed too strong, to let her heart wander towards something so fragile. But Lila had seen it. In the quiet spaces between Jackson's visits and her mother's laughter, the little girl had drawn something real. A family. And that scared Alara more than anything. Because this time, it was not just her heart at risk. This time, if it all fell apart, Lila would fall with her. The shift came quietly, like clouds rolling in over a warm day. Just as something fragile and unspoken was beginning to grow between Jackson and Alara, the headlines hit. A local newspaper ran a story: "Billionaire, redevelopment or displacement? Who really wins?" The piece framed Jackson as a heartless investor, using charity as a mask to gentrify low-income neighborhoods and force residents out. More media followed. Former tenants came forward, some angry, others just disappointed. Online forums exploded, accusations flew, the narrative turned quickly and cruelly. Jackson had faced bad press before, but this was different. It cut close, because this time, it wasn't just about business, it was about people, about her. He rushed back to New York to deal with the storm. Lawyers, PR teams, emergency meetings. He didn't mean to leave Alara without a word, but in the chaos, there was no time. He thought it could wait. It couldn't. Days later, Ivy Lancaster showed up at Alara's door. She wore a sleek coat, designer heels, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You must be Alara," she said smoothly. "I'm an old friend of Jackson's." Alara didn't respond. "I just thought you should know," Ivy continued, stepping closer. "Jackson's back in New York. He's very busy. A lot going on. He has a reputation to manage. a future to build, with someone who fits into that world. Ilara's breath caught. Ivy went on, voice low and sharp. He and I have a long history, and there's talk of a proposal coming soon. A life like his doesn't fit inside a place like this. She gave one last cool smile and turned away. Ilara stood alone in the doorway long after she left. She wanted to believe Ivy was lying, but the silence from Jackson, the reality of who he was, where he came from, it all came crashing in. She looked at herself in the mirror, tired eyes, worn jeans, blonde hair pulled back with no time for style. Not the girl she used to be. Not the woman someone like him would ever choose. Maybe Jackson had just been a moment. A warm breeze before winter. That night, Ilara packed their things. 2 bags, Lila's wheelchair. That was all. She cleaned the apartment the way she'd found it, quiet, spotless, forgettable. On the table, she left a note. "Thank you for everything. You gave my daughter joy I'll never forget. And for a moment, I remembered who I used to be. That's more than I ever hoped for. Wishing you peace, Ilara." Beside it, she placed Lila's drawing, the one with 3 figures under a red heart. The paper was wrinkled, edges soft from being held too often, but the colors were still bright. She couldn't take it. It didn't belong to her anymore. 3 days later, Jackson returned. He walked the familiar hallway, rehearsing what he would say, how sorry he was, how he never meant to disappear. He knocked. No answer. He opened the door. The room was empty. No toys, no books, no laughter, just stillness. And then, on the table, he saw it. The note. And the drawing. He stepped forward and picked it up with trembling hands. His eyes locked on the red heart, now slightly folded. He sank into the nearest chair, held the paper against his chest, and closed his eyes. There were no cameras, no audience, just one man, alone in a room filled with absence, holding a crayon sketch like it might stop him from breaking. And in that silence, Jackson Whitmore finally understood what it meant to lose something money could never replace. Back in New York, the boardroom was tense. Jackson stood at the head of the long table, surrounded by executives, attorneys, and consultants, all waiting for him to reconsider. The offer on the table was monumental. A luxury redevelopment deal in Miami worth tens of millions. A flagship opportunity. The kind of project that elevated legacies and opened political doors. He closed the folder in front of him. "I'm not taking it," he said simply. The room fell silent. Then came the barrage, questions, objections, frustration. But Jackson did not flinch. He had already made his decision. "I'm putting everything behind North Haven. We finish the project, all of it, not as a showcase, not as PR, as a new kind of model, one that actually leaves people better than we found them." "You're risking everything for sentiment," one board member snapped. "No," Jackson replied. "I'm risking everything for something I can live with." He left the meeting with his phone already in hand, calling contacts, reassigning funds, rerouting manpower. But none of it mattered as much as what he had to do next. Find Ilara. For weeks, he searched. Quietly, respectfully. He knew better than to show up with press or ask favors from power. So he reached out to nonprofits, local schools, community centers, any place that might host a ballet class or a women's outreach program. And then, one Tuesday morning, he found it. A modest community hall on the edge of a tired suburb. No name on the building, just laughter echoing from within and the faint sound of classical piano music from a speaker. Through the window, he saw a group of young girls practicing simple movements, wobbly but eager. At the far end of the room, Ilara knelt next to a little girl, gently adjusting the position of her feet. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a soft bun, loose strands falling around her face. She looked different, not in a glamorous way, in a fuller way, like someone who had come back to life. And then she looked up. Her eyes met his. For a long moment, neither moved. No smile, no greeting, just stillness, recognition, pain, surprise. Jackson stepped through the door. The music faded to a stop. The children went quiet, sensing something sacred in the air. He walked past them slowly, his gaze never leaving Alara's. But he did not go to her. He went to Lila, sitting quietly in a corner with a half-eaten cookie in her lap, watching everything with wide, steady eyes. Jackson knelt in front of her. He placed one hand over his heart, looked into her eyes, and said gently, sincerely, "Do I have your permission now to adopt your mom?" Lila blinked, stunned. Then her face lit up like sunshine through glass. She giggled, nodding so hard her ponytails bounced on her shoulders. "Yes, yes, yes, yes," she said, clapping her hands. Around the room, tension melted. The girls laughed. A teacher near the door smiled and wiped her eyes. Elara stood motionless, her hand covering her mouth. She could not breathe. Not from shock, not even from happiness, but from the weight of the moment. This was not a proposal, not a rescue, not a romantic climax from a movie. It was a question, a humble, reverent question from a man who had everything and was offering himself anyway. She crossed the room slowly, each step unsteady with emotion. When she reached them, Lila threw her arms around Jackson's neck. Alara looked at him through blurred eyes. "I didn't need permission," he said softly, "but I wanted it." She laughed, a broken, trembling sound, and nodded, tears falling freely now. Jackson stood and opened his arms. She stepped into them, not because she was swept away, but because she had finally chosen to believe she was allowed to be held. And in that moment, surrounded by music, children, and hope, they began again, not as strangers from different worlds, but as people who had decided to meet each other exactly as they were. Alara did not say yes right away. She did not make promises, or ask for any. What she did do was let Jackson come back into their lives, not as a billionaire or a savior, but as himself. The man who had knelt before her daughter and asked, not declared. The man who had listened without trying to fix everything. That was what made her stay. Jackson never rushed her. He visited often, helping where he could, but never overstepping. He washed dishes while Lila told jokes. He waited patiently outside ballet lessons, holding warm drinks for both of them. He brought home groceries, but always let Alara cook. He did not try to replace anything. He simply showed up. Over time, the distance between them faded. One evening, Alara placed her hand lightly on his as he sat beside her. That was the beginning of something real, quiet, fragile, honest. She trusted him not because he was perfect, but because he stayed when everything got complicated. When Jackson first brought up the idea of helping Lila with further treatment, Alara hesitated. She had never let anyone handle those decisions before. But Jackson did not come with an offer. He came with research, specialists, trial therapies, new methods, and a simple question. What do you want for her future? Not what he wanted, not what could be fixed, what Alara wanted, what Lila needed. Together, they chose a neurological rehabilitation center known for its gentle, long-term approach. The paperwork listed the patient's name, followed by family contact, Whitmore Monroe household. Alara stared at that form for a long time before signing. Weeks passed. Lila's muscles strengthened slightly, her posture improved. But the biggest change was not physical. It was in her laugh. She giggled more. She asked more questions. She started humming songs in the morning and asked to go outside before the sun even finished rising. One afternoon, Jackson surprised them with a custom-designed three-wheeled tandem bike, a special model built for children with limited mobility. It had a wide rear seat for Lila, complete with side supports and safety bars, and pedals that moved gently with motion, even if her legs could not push them herself. They took it to the park as the sun began to sink low, washing everything in warm gold. Jackson rode in front, steering. Lila sat in the back, arms raised to the wind, hair flying like little flags. Elara jogged beside them for a while, clapping her hands to the rhythm of their ride, singing off-key and laughing. They made loops around the wide paths, past benches, fountains, and trees painted orange by the afternoon light. Every time they passed a group of kids or smiling parents, Lila would wave proudly, her cheeks flushed with joy. Then, as they coasted to a gentle stop near a patch of wildflowers, Lila leaned back, eyes shining. She shouted to no one in particular, "My family is the best family in the world." Jackson turned, grinning over his shoulder. Elara froze for half a second, her heart suddenly too full to hold still. There was no miracle in that moment. Lila still could not walk. Elara's bank account was still modest. Jackson still had headlines to fight and reputations to rebuild. But none of that mattered. Because healing had come, not in the form of a cure, but in laughter that rang out without fear, in shared meals and soft morning silences, in the way Elara now let herself lean slightly into his shoulder as they watched Lila play. Love, they had learned, was not perfect. It was presence. It was staying. And it was learning to believe, together, that joy could be real, even if life was not easy. The breeze that morning carried salt, sunlight, and something softer, like the quiet hope of a new beginning. On the shores of North Haven, rows of white folding chairs faced the sea. There was no elaborate arch, no velvet aisle runner, no gilded decor. Only wildflowers tucked into driftwood, and the sound of waves folding gently onto sand. The guest list was small. Most of them were familiar faces, residents from the old neighborhood, fellow single mothers who had once shared long, tired nights with Elara in the laundry room, and bright-eyed children who had learned to twirl under her patient gaze. They brought potluck dishes, handmade cards, and tears that brimmed before the ceremony even began. Jackson waited at the front in a sand-colored suit, no tie, shoes off. His eyes never left the winding path from the beach house. Then he saw her, Elara, in a simple white dress that caught the wind like a sail. Her golden hair was loose, grazing her shoulders in soft waves. Her smile was quiet, radiant, like a woman who had stopped trying to be anything other than completely herself. She did not carry a bouquet. Instead, she held Lila's hand. And Lila wore a pink flower girl dress, dotted with tiny embroidered stars. At her waist, a pale ribbon floated behind her like wings. But it was not the dress that made the guests gasp. It was the sight of her walking. Just a few steps, assisted by a custom-designed support frame strapped gently around her legs and back. But they were her steps, slow, brave, and deliberate. Each foot pressed into the sand with quiet determination. The crowd instinctively stood. A few people clapped through their tears. Someone whispered a prayer. Lila grinned, wide as the sea behind her, and whispered to her mom, "I want to walk to him." Elara nodded through the tears. And Lila did. When she reached Jackson, he dropped to his knees to steady her, arms wide open. "You made it," he said, voice shaking. "I'm your flower girl," she whispered proudly. He scooped her into a hug, lifting her into the air, spinning once as the crowd erupted in applause. The ceremony was short. They spoke their vows barefoot on the sand, voices steady despite everything their hearts carried. And when it was time for the rings, Jackson held Elara's hand in one and reached for Lila with the other. He looked between them, then said, "I didn't just adopt your mom. I adopted the two brightest lights of my life." Elara choked on a sob. Lila clapped her hands. And the crowd, those who had seen them fall, rise, and build, stood together and wept openly, not from sadness, but from something deeper, hope. In the distance, gulls called over the water. The sun warmed their backs. The wind picked up the scent of salt and cake and children's laughter. No, this was not a perfect love story. But it was a real one, built on quiet bravery, chosen joy, and the belief that family is not born, it is made. And here, on this quiet shore, a new family began. Thank you for watching this heart-touching journey of love, resilience, and the kind of family that's chosen, not inherited. If this story moved you, if Lila's innocence, Ilara's quiet strength, and Jackson's unwavering kindness stirred something in your heart, don't forget to support us. Hit the hype button to let us know you felt something today. Subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more emotional, inspiring tales that heal, uplift, and stay with you long after the screen fades. Because sometimes, all it takes is one story to change the way we see the world. See you in the next one.